Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to start the webinar now. My name is Letizia Manzoni. I am here today as a representative of Philea to welcome you all to this webinar. Today is also World Art Day, and it is the second year that the Arts and Culture Funders Forum organizes a meeting to celebrate the work that Philanthropy does to support artists and practitioners. For those of you who don't know, the Arts and Culture Funders Forum is a network that aims to help shape the future of cultural philanthropy. It provides an environment for arts and culture funders in Europe to come together and to work together to reinforce the sector. Today we have a very exciting session, so we're going to talk about the value of arts and culture and how philanthropy is tackling the challenge of recognizing the value of arts and culture beyond quantitative data. We're going to also discuss how funders are contributing to expressing arts impact in numbers and what practices they are putting into place in terms of monitoring, evaluation, and learning to avoid the instrumentalization in the field. This is actually the second webinar of a series that started back in March that is titled Cultural Philanthropy in Action. And it's basically a series of conversations among arts and cultural funders. We have researchers, artists, cultural practitioners, and funders that share their views and frame a conversation among foundations that are willing to find collaboration opportunities to support artistic freedom against instrumentalization. The series will actually end in a month. So on the 15th of May, we will have the last webinar of the series. And the last appointment will be titled Remote Engagement, Arts and Culture for Youth and Community. So we also hope to see you there in a month. So before we start, and then I'll hand over to Sveta Andreeva from the European Cultural Foundation for the moderation of the session. I just wanted to ask to remind you a few housekeeping rules. So if you can please rename yourselves with your full name and the organization you are representing. If you can mute yourself just to avoid any background noise. And as for the session, we will hear from the speakers first, and then we'll also have some time in breakout rooms, in two separate breakout rooms, to just ask questions to the speakers. So the speakers will be also joining the breakout rooms and have deeper discussions on the topics that will be presented. I think that's all from my side. So Sveta, I will hand over to you to start the session. And thank you everyone for participating.
Hello everyone. I'm Sveta Andreeva from the European Culture Foundation. And European Culture Foundation is currently the chair of the Arts and Culture Funders Forum Catalyst Board. So on behalf of the chair of the Catalyst Board, I want to welcome you as well. And I'm also going to moderate that webinar today with our excellent speakers that we have invited. And we'll be very happy also to hear your experiences, your feedbacks later on in the breakout rooms. Actually, we are the chair, but the co-chair of this network is Daniela and Nina Carasso Foundation. And I also want to welcome you on their behalf. Unfortunately, Klaus Fruchtnis, the vice chair, he couldn't join today. But we want to also make this very useful for all of you. Since I've been working a lot also in the past in this topic of valuing the arts and culture and the work of artists and of culture organizations, I'm very keen to introduce you the topic of today and also our speakers. Why did we choose that topic? As philanthropic organizations, we work in the area of arts and culture for many years. We often stumble upon the question how to value best the work of our partners, of the individuals, as well as with all the organizations on the ground that we support in various ways, not only financially, but also in kind and in various different, we do this in different ways, but Philea members have often raised over the years the topic that we need to exchange knowledge and learning about the ways we evaluate, monitor, capture the essence of our achievements, the achievements of the organizations we work with. So there used to be in the past also training labs, peer exchanges, also among foundations that work in different areas. But it's for the first time that the arts and culture foundations, those that work in this field, raise that topic and the need to exchange knowledge and to learn something more from each other about we how we do this in our practice and actually what are those methods and tools that suit our work best, and of course the work of the artists. The nature of arts and culture work requires different lenses than the standard measurements that are quantitative, that we monitor, evaluate, collect different types of data. Those different lenses that arts and culture need combine the standard measurement knowledge with the subtle art of dialogue and communication with the artists, with the cultural workers, sometimes with audiences, as well as multiple stakeholders we work with. And this helps us to best understand their unique and intangible contribution to the society. Those of you who have done measurements of different kinds, they know how challenging these processes of evaluations can be, both for the funders, but also for the beneficiaries. They sometimes can be compared to flossing. They're very healthy, but quite uncomfortable for many of the people involved. But we are all pressured by external requirements for transparency, for accountability, for visibility, sometimes expectations that we have to demonstrate our success or the success of the organizations that work in the field. And sometimes we miss really important things and values like trust, like cherishing collaborative experiences, and we sometimes miss important learnings. What is also very important in this topic is to mention is that it is a bilateral learning process. So it's not a unilateral process. And today, to address some of these challenges and to learn something new, I hope, we have invited three excellent experts in the field. Laura Alexander, who is an independent researcher, and she's going to present their experience together with Iwen Yin. Laura is used to be a coordinator of monitoring, evaluation, and learning at Prince Claus Fund until very recently. She was in charge also for collecting and analyzing data. Iwen Yin is a designer and a theorist, and she works also in relationship-centered design. And she also can share some of her practice in conversation with Laura. So that they will start the first presentation. Our third speaker, who will start after them, is Dr. Ludmila Petrova. She is director of the CREARE Center for Research in Arts and Economics, and she will introduce us later the value-based approach. So I would like first to invite Laura and Iwen to start their presentation. And the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sveta, for that lovely introduction. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us on this Tuesday. At least where I am, it's a very beautiful day, so I'm glad that you have made time to join for this webinar. Yeah, just to introduce myself briefly, as Sveta mentioned, I was until the end of 2024 the coordinator of monitoring, evaluation and learning at the Prince Claus Fund, which is an organization, as many of you will know, based in the Netherlands, which supports artists and cultural practitioners around the world, predominantly in the so-called Global South. And my focus over the 4 years that I was in that role was on researching the impact of trust-based funding. I had the privileged position of being able to work on this from the very beginning of the Prince Claus Fund's experiment with giving unearmarked grants, through which these grants, different scales of grant at different moments in an artist's career, were handed over completely free of any kind of earmarking or budgets, but just as a trust-based investment in an artist's career and the development of their practice. And that meant that we were able to start relatively free of preconceptions and work in a way that was driven by genuine curiosity about what actually happened if you give, say, 100 young artists a year, many of them working in incredibly difficult circumstances, 5,000 euros and a platform to talk to each other, but otherwise leave them more or less alone. And we'll get on to, I think, later some of the methodologies that we used for that. And in the years since then, we've been able to come up with some answers to that question. But I don't necessarily want to get into the answers now, but instead I would like to, for this talk, stay with this idea of curiosity. In general, I think I've come to understand my work as an evaluator as essentially being the child in a lot of rooms. I think anyone who's been in a room with a 5-year-old knows what it's like to be constantly hit by these questions of why and what happens if you do this, what happens if I press this button or break this or change this. To me, I think that's fundamentally what research and evaluation is about. And that means that when you're motivated by curiosity and by ideas of value, it's less about measuring and more about coming to understand and describe the networks and mechanisms of change that artists, but also philanthropists, as well as publics, are enmeshed in globally. So I'm going to present together with my co-presenter, Iwen Yin, some of ways that we've been experimenting with of structuring this curiosity. And Iwen is especially going to share her perspective as often a recipient of funding and somebody who works with a lot of practitioners around many of these questions. So before we start, I'd like to hand over to Iwen to introduce herself in a little more detail.
Thank you, Laura. I'm an artist, designer, and researcher. In recent year, I focus a lot on like how exactly we can fund sustainable activism and collective practice in the arts. And for that, and I work very closely with a lot of communities. I do extensive ethnography and constructed a kind of almost like a diagram about what exactly is a community for such a vague term to capture a kind of collective practice. And I also work with institution practitioners who cares a lot about this kind of question, how they can actually support communities in a better and suitable term instead of just treating them like artists with multiple bodies. And also work with a lot of funders, also including Lara, to really like explore this kind of question with a more critical but also forward-looking end. So today I'm gonna serve as a kind of person that kind of give you the flesh about like what's actually happening on the ground, and then sort of and then engaging with the question that Laura's gonna put out. So yeah. Back to you, Laura.
Thanks so much. So yeah, the first question, or the first perhaps big concept I'd like to put out and sort of throw into the middle of the room, is this idea of situatedness. This draws from feminist epistemologists, most notably, of course, Donna Haraway. And this is an idea that both the sensing and the sense making that go into monitoring, evaluation, and learning can be understood as situated practices of knowledge building. What does that mean? If that is essentially a way of getting out of this dichotomy that we're often thrust into when it comes to thinking about knowledge between so-called objective knowledge, this view from nowhere that is supposed to produce a single true explanation of what is going on, but that, as a lot of people have begun to see more and more, especially in this area of MEL, has a tendency to prioritize the viewpoint of the most powerful, whether that's funders or people in the global north, or anybody else who happens to be the most powerful viewpoint in the room. And on the other end of that spectrum, a kind of extreme relativist position in which every view is as important as every other view, and it becomes very difficult to produce fixed conclusions. So understanding perspectives as situated means understanding them as objective but partial, shaped by the viewpoints that are available to differently positioned actors. And the metaphor here is one of seeing, where you stand influences what you are able to see and how you are able to see, but doesn't affect the truth of what you see. It just says that what you are able to see is only part of a bigger whole. So thinking of what funders, but also artists, grantees, audiences, what they are able to see as situated means taking into account the place that they are looking from, as well as the time, the period of time in which they are able to observe, and the moment in which those observations are listened to, and also the power dynamics under which information is shared between different actors. Whenever an observation is made and shared, that can't necessarily be separated from the person who is doing the observing, the position in the power hierarchies, and the place and the time that it's made. These contingencies don't limit the objectivity of observation, but they are part of a bigger picture. And the role of the researcher or the evaluator, perhaps, is to weave together these different perspectives. And by doing this, try to puzzle out how under what circumstances superficially different statements are actually just different ways of seeing the same phenomenon. I'm sure many of you will have seen the famous illustration that often gets shown of blind men feeling different parts of an elephant, and one person says that it's the trunk, it's a tree, and one person says it's a gate or a wall. So often situated knowledges can work like that. But in other situations, there can be genuine conflicts to be explored and genuine disagreements that need to be, where decisions need to be made between different perspectives. I'm going to pass over to Iwen now to give some examples of the receiving end of this situatedness and how she has experienced this sense of funders and grantees, especially being often in different situations, different situatedness from each other when it comes to knowledge.
Yeah, I did a lot of field research and I work with a lot of communities, and quite interestingly, not only I understand the funders' language from a design perspective or whatever you call it, but also what I find interesting is when it's on the field, when it's happening on the ground, where community practitioner, usually when I'm able to make them say the truth in their mind, it's like they actually don't know what they're doing, right? And that is kind of like only a partial truth, is that they don't know what they're doing in terms of the funder's eyes. And there's always this kind of anxiety about for community practitioners, collectives, they kind of felt like there's certain kind of expectation fall under with that kind of gaze or evaluation or understanding about what they're doing. And because they want to get the money, they sometimes will trying to hit the keywords, etc. But at the same time, when we going back to the field, most of the situated practitioner not necessarily having an immediate clue about what they're doing unless they were given time and opportunity to reflect. And actually, ironically, that from my point of view, that is usually the better practitioner, because they really get in touch with the ground. They focus on what is happening in front of them, although they also will have a kind of vision, but that kind of vision leaves space for what is actually happening on the ground, and therefore allowing them to connect with the field and connect with their audience or the people that they want to connect to better. On the other end, then you will have the kind of very practitioner that coming from the art field that know all the jargon about what all the expectation and the hot topics that in the funding and the kind of broader art discourse is about, and then they know how to speak on that conceptual ends, but they will also get really their practice get hinged by that kind of conceptual performance instead of really dealing with the actual people in front of them. And I find that is quite a contradiction in terms of what we talk about situatedness, is how does the funders gaze looking at the communities would actually create a kind of distance, and how do we look at them in a more proper supportive end that is not driven themselves away from the actual practice, from the actual connection, but actually coming with them and then sit with them and feel with them. So that would be a very brief, not necessary example, but an observation, I suppose. Yeah.
Thanks for that. And I think what that really starts to touch on is the need for translation. And that translation goes deeper than something that is just literal. The fact that often the languages that are spoken within these spaces differ wildly, and the language that is typically given the most prominence, often English, is not necessarily the first language of many of the people in these conversations. Certainly, it relates to the fact that funders tend to be allowed to dictate the language that these conversations take place in. And there is a very interesting conversation to be had about the way that technology is starting to change that relationship through the use of automated translation software. Generative AIs like ChatGPT is very quickly changing what it means to talk about translation in these kinds of spaces. But there's a deeper level of translation as well, which is a movement not just between different spoken languages, but between different ways of using the same language and ways of using language that are shaped by specific worldviews. In particular, I find that languages of evaluation can often form a kind of jargon. Even the word evaluation itself is a kind of jargon. I don't know about other evaluators here in the room, but typically when I'm in any kind of a gathering with people from outside the funding world and I say that I'm an evaluator, I'm met with completely baffled looks. Nobody really knows what that means. And there tends to be an assumption that it is about making judgments. So moving away from this jargon and creating a form of translation means, I think, not just providing a glossary where we explain particular jargony words like evaluation into a supposedly neutral form of language, but actually listening and trying to find how the same underlying concept might be articulated by somebody with a completely different worldview, say a worldview shaped by experience working in the arts, working with communities, working with grassroots organizations. And often in that sense, we find that the same concepts are present, they are shared, but they are articulated through language completely differently. And the borders of these concepts are identified as being in completely different places. Now, of course, when you're an evaluator working within a funder, this can often go both ways. The translation takes place not just between the funder and the grantees, but between the funder and whatever bodies or actors the funder itself is answerable to, whether that's within the organization itself. Within larger organizations, there might be bigger teams where translation needs to take place between teams, or bigger and smaller donors or even ministerial bodies. This, of course, touches on the assumption that these different ways of seeing the world that you are mediating between are fundamentally compatible. And that kind of compatibility between worldviews is necessary to make translation possible. I think this is an assumption that we tend to make. We tend to assume good faith. But of course, with the rise of the far right across Europe and the US and many parts of the world, I'm not so sure that this assumption is always true. So there is this caveat of, are we looking at a space where the same concept can be articulated differently and translation mediation is possible? Or are we in a space of fundamentally conflicting worldviews? I'd like to pass over to Irene again to respond to this question of translation.
Yeah, I think in my observation with communities, the most obvious thing when you talk about English speaking is when you they will immediately create a kind of divide. Who get to immediately be approached and have a direct connection with the funder, with the curators and evaluators, and etc. And who doesn't, right? And that kind, I think that would be a very interesting entry to look at like how translation itself is some sort of like privilege, but that privilege should come with the kind of responsibility. And I find that the kind of responsibility comes in two ends. One is connecting back to situatedness. Is I find the good a kind of ethical evaluator or the kind of translator will be first and foremost prioritize, orient towards the interests of the collective, the situated group that is doing the practice, and at the same time, I think ironically, like so that we can, with that kind of situatedness, then we can actually learn from like what we haven't been known yet, in the kind of value framework that we are evaluating. And on the other hand, we are also looking at like the translator at the same time also serve as some kind of gatekeeping, what is valuable and what is not valuable. And then you transfer that into a kind of discourse framework or value framework for the funder, for different kind of locale and different kind of culture. And how do you make that kind of navigation a fair and kind of mutually reciprocal kind of relationship? I find that a very important kind of translation or even curatorial work, if we might say. And in some of my research that I wrote about, like the very essence about community and collective practice in the arts is not for a lot of people who assume to produce a kind of possible scenario from the outlook, but rather how these kind of practice will allow people to live through the possible alternative. And that will really relying on a lot of supports to really giving them the space to reflect and sit in what their everyday reality is, instead of pushing to a kind of acceptable, glorified kind of performance. And I find like how does the translator will be able to tell funders to say that to just fund people to live differently, to explore differently, to tell us there's different way to organize is already a very important value for you to fund, and how do we structure the kind of course that allow people with money, the big check, would actually subscribe to that idea. I think that's the bigger role of the translator. How do we push forward a new value framework that coming from the ground, coming from the situation, and then allowing us to fund things differently. So yeah, that's will be my response. Yeah.
So this brings us on quite neatly to the question of value itself, which is, I think, the core of what we're here to discuss today. And as the title of the event and the introduction that we've heard suggests, we are constantly being asked to demonstrate the value of arts and culture. And implicit in this request is typically a binary between so-called intrinsic value, whatever that might mean, and value in terms of contribution to certain social or political goals, which is often articulated as instrumental value. And there is within this binary often a presupposed value proposition in itself, where intrinsic value is perhaps more valuable than instrumental value, unless you are in a certain other context, in which case maybe it's not. But in any sense, they are seen as things that can be pulled apart from one another, things that can be viewed separately. In my experience, differences in how people understand value, depending on where they're situated, where they're looking from, actually go much deeper than instrumental versus intrinsic value. What we value, how we understand what it is to be valuable, is core to who we are. And what to one person might be the intrinsic value of a work, might be for somebody else a nice side effect that goes alongside the real value. I think we see this especially often in funding the arts, where the value that a funder perceives in a project and the value that the artist who has implemented that project are often completely different values. And because those values are compatible with one another, the situation is sort of allowed to continue. I think this forms a lovely equilibrium where, in many cases, people just sort of tacitly pretend that they see the value that the other person is talking about and that we're both talking about the same value. As long as they don't come into conflict with one another, this is a perfectly stable equilibrium. I think that if we understand monitoring and evaluation as a form of translation between situated worldviews, then treating these perspectives as equally valid within their specific situatedness helps us to mediate these different conceptions of value and to move beyond the divide between an instrumentalized and perhaps objective, data-driven mindset that official viewpoints might have, and a subjective, nuanced, more organic understanding that artists can embody. While certain bodies, particularly official ones, may see their work as grounded in fact and objectivity, artists can often approach their role as more relative and essential to the social fabric and resisting rigid quantification. And by mediating between these different perspectives and understandings of value, I think it's possible to acknowledge both without reinforcing a divide in which they're necessarily opposed to each other, and find a way to synthesize diverse narratives and translate between these values into a language that can be accessible to different people, create space for understanding between different viewpoints.
And maybe I can give like sort of more like a small, like internal, not exactly an example, but really when I look at community, the moment when they receive fundings, things immediately get very spicy. Let's say that like it triggers question about like the past experience in the collective, in like it question how do we understand labor, how is our relationship, how is our space is holding up to support each other, all this kind of question, what I call as like the kind of like solidarity experience in a collective experience is always subject to question when at the moment that they receive money, because when everyone has no money and all the problem somehow becomes endurable, right? Because like we are all just sticking here together trying to give support to each other. But when money is received, what in my research is like then people will really like the kind of value framework starting to kicks in. People get to ask like, what do we value all together as a collective? Do we value sweeping the floor every day to make the space clean, or do we actually value more in people who is able to connect with outsider and getting a lot more audience in the house? That kind of question immediately become very, very visible, candid in the moment of distributing the funding. And also then further on, it will also trigger a further question about what is the ethic, what is the ideology about this collective, and then what is the whole point for us to spend all this time and effort in making this collective all together. So money really becomes this kind of turning point in a collective moment. And so what I'm currently working on is trying to promote this idea that every time that you send out money, come with some kind of onboarding program or even just like a workshop for helping this kind of collective to reflecting on what are they doing when, like, what are we actually talking about when we're talking about money. Sometimes the money is only a medium for people to talk about the things that they realize that they're not in the same value framework with each other, even from the same collective, right? Because sometimes what we understand what is important is so much part of our environment, our growing trajectory, our family education, and all that kind of thing. And usually the confrontation moment goes with a collective. We always assume that we are all the same people and we believe in the same thing. Only when money comes in, we realize, oh, actually we have quite some discrepancy. So I think like this is not supposed to be a problem when it's facilitated. And what I find now with a lot of funding is that there's a lot of expectation that the money get like thrown into the pot and then it will figure out themselves, right? So I think there's a lot of reflection in understanding money as a medium of value, how it kind of provoke different kind of discussion within the collective. And if we were giving the space and support for them to reflect on that, there will be a lot more nuanced outcome that can come out other than just a show of solidarity. So yeah, that would be my
Thank you very much, both of you. I think the time is up for this presentation, but that was extremely interesting, I think, to hear both perspectives. I actually have a lot of questions, but I'm not going to ask them now because I'll leave some space to Lucy to continue on that. But what I found specifically very, very exciting in your from your input so far is like this idea of that money actually, or the funding, I would say, for a certain purpose, actually changes something in the beneficiaries' minds, or it has a potential to change something. That's at least what I gathered from Iwan's intervention. So it's not in vain. That's a good news. We are not funding for in vain just to make someone else happy. There is a certain change or mindset change that can occur. And your last point was like that we need to facilitate that, or at least there should be some sort of facilitation. The other question mark that came to my mind was more to Laura's intervention, like seeing ourselves, the funding bodies, funding organizations, as mediators of different values, different interests, because we are constantly trying to be, we are in some sort of intermediary function. I find this extremely, I find this extremely challenging role to actually have to needing to serve too many purposes, but also to be mediator between too many interests. I think that's a major challenge that we need to reflect upon. But thirdly, I think it's perfect what transition. It would make perfect transition between what you have been discussing and Ludmila's presentation. The different types of values that the funders can, come with to the market or to the floor with and the different values of the beneficiaries or of their core work, or the different languages that sometimes are used about the same thing. I think that's a very good question to start with, because Ludmila is going exactly to talk about the value-based approach and how does it work for and with, together with the organizations in the field of arts and culture. So I would like to give the floor now to Ludmila. She has a presentation, yes. You can unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yes, right. Now, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation and to Philea Network and also to European Cultural Foundation for this possibility to share my experience as a researcher and educator and evaluator for more than 20 years. And we work together with colleagues from Erasmus University and develop so-called value-based approach, which now we implement, or not now, since many years. We implement across Europe for cultural, social related organizations. And I appreciate very much the previous speakers' presentations because indeed they touch upon the principles of evaluation practices. And I will try to illustrate this with some of our examples of work recently. I mean, now we are working on very big Horizon Europe project where we're trying to evaluate the multiplicities of values of the bottom-up cultural organizations in the GLAM sector. This is galleries, libraries, archives, museums, and also share other experiences. I have a small presentation to assist to illustrate some of the points I would like to do. So it will be a little bit different mode of experience. First of all, of course, the questions here that we are trying to answer is how to support the cultural organization and at the same time to allow them to remain artistically free, authentic, truthful, honest, and at the same time asking them to contribute to social transformation. And of course, it's all about the questions of objectives. But what we like to contribute here with the value-based approach, it's about not objectives, but fundamentals of their practices, which we defined like value-driven purposes. And the question is to what extent these organizations, while accepting different funding and different objectives of different funders, are able to act upon their own purposes. And at the same time bringing worth to the others or realizing impact. To answer these questions, we propose to go really to the fundamental, to the essentials of the organizations, of their values. Here I listed very briefly to have an idea what kind of organizations we work. This is small and medium-sized organizations in the cultural sector in Turin, where they work with designers and homeless people, or educators who are going to their vocational institutions and provide different type of educations, or projects like Rotterdam Unlimited Festival. We have a limit time span, or the program of creative community of Art Council Malta, where actually we evaluated the entire creative community programs, or broadcast program from the national broadcaster in the Netherlands. Oral History Group, it's a network for oral history. In Greece, the consortium, it's a small independent center for visual arts. Schule Museum, it's LGDB Museum in Berlin. I don't list all, but just to have an idea, I will reflect my experience with these small and medium-sized organizations who are working from the bottom-up perspective. What we trying to achieve is producing 3 layers of evaluation tool, what we call quality evaluator, because indeed we're trying to evaluate the quality of the practices through different values of either the organization itself or the profile of the funder, or even on the policy level, we had the chance to evaluate different policies towards certain sectors. On the first layer, it's all about, of course, value co-creations in our when we talk about value-based approach, it's how these values are constructed or coming at place, and how they inform or motivate or drive the internal operation of the organizations. But also to what extent they are worth it for the others, for the broader communities, for the local communities, or so forth. So this is the questions we trying to answer through understanding the different values. We're adopting the basic human values framework of Schwartz and adapted it to our value-based value clusters. Of course, I mean, here it's only, translations of what Schwartz proposes, different possibilities. And let's see how this translates in the cultural sector by identifying the different clusters of values. Well, I just keep it a little bit shortcut to keep account with the time, but in general, the value-based approach, it's 3 stages approach. So on the first stage, we indeed identify together in the participatory manner with the organizations what are those values which really define their purpose, or those values who are the most important. And you can see how diverse could be the clusters. They're not all represented for all organizations. They're not all organizations pursue all this. But of course, we're trying to map in this sector what is relevant. And then we're trying to zoom in each category, each cluster of this. And for example, for the Arts Council of Malta program, if you look into their well-being purpose, they really define it like self-confidence or creativity on the personal trait, skill development, talent development. Inclusion on the community level, it's very much related to the sense of belonging, collaboration, diversity, acceptance, and so forth, so forth. So in this way, we're trying to explore those values who are really, really important for the organizations that we are working with. And we do this in a very reflective manner. This is not with existing metrics or just we are trying to let organizations through different methods. Sometimes we use also art-related methods to explore their own cores, their own fundamentals. And by this, trying to keep as reflective as possible the practice. Then the next stage is to see how these values informs the relationships with of the organizations with the different stakeholders, because it's turned out, as we know, that one organizations share different values with the different stakeholders, and this helps them very much to understand how to position themselves within the different stakeholder groups. As you see, for example, here, this is Costruire Bellezza. This is designers working with shelters, homeless shelters in Turin. Now, this is a program of the municipality. They adopted it for their purposes, but it was beginning as a bottom-up project from designers and anthropologists. So it was clear that innovations, it's relevant, for example, to the social workers as a new way of innovations, or the designers, students, or the tutors, and so forth, so forth. So relating in this way, the stakeholders groups with the values of the organizations, we help them, organizations, to align their purposes with the different groups of stakeholders. And then they can have more core activities which can support each of the realization of each of the values. This is the third stage where this is the assessment. We don't call it evaluations. Evaluations, as agreed, it's a quite complicated concept. It's usually connected to very well-defined indicators. When we talk about values, this is impossible. So we are working with rather assessment, which include judgments. And this doesn't mean it's not, of course, it's not objective enough, but it's require much more attention. It's much more a longer process of investigating the different possibilities, because we are following the DEWI framework also from that values only can observe through experiences. So we cannot measure something which is very abstract, like the value of creativity or the value of innovation, unless we observe it in some kind of behavior or experiences from those who are engaged. So here to illustrate what does mean shifts in value in our terms, this is again for the costruire bellezza. We assessed the importance of the value of innovation before the project start, and then after 2 years again we enter. Of course, we have different also moments through the this period of implementations to monitor the different adjustment between the values. And you can see that, for example, this is the dark blue. It's basically the expected, defined in the beginning of the program. The light blue is the experience after the program. And then the differences that realizes actually we call impact. So the change that they can contribute to. In this term here, it's the first one, it's innovation in terms of new working methods for the social workers. So social workers in the Costruire Bellezza project find important change that they adopted new method of working, which was, let's say, design-based. For the innovation in terms of new learning for the students, for the design students, the expectations were met. So this is affirmation of the expectations, and we cannot talk about change of the perspectives of the value, but rather affirmations of these values. The next one is the attitude to the attentions or the empathy to the others, in like a value of sharing, which also the experience was exceeding the expected. So we can have, you can consider like the change of the attitudes, and so on and so on. I mean, we use qualitative and quantitative methods. In a way, we first starting with when we're talking about, let's say, these value maps here, this is derived from focus groups with organizations and their stakeholders to identify which is the most important values that they like to identify and translate this in specific purposes. What else? What is the benefits for the organizations, let's say? I was asked to reflect a bit. On the left side, you see the purpose defined by the ASAI. This is Associations for Volunteer Education in Turin, where they're trying to provide services to the regular education system and help them to solve the serious issues they have. And before we enter the conversations, they were defining their purpose as decrease in dropout rates of the student. And all these numbers were always illustrating the way their achievement or their impact. When we enter our work with us, at the end, we figure out that besides their objectives to decrease the dropouts, they're doing much bigger job and much important job. They're putting the flourishing of the students and as a priority in their work. So they contribute to much bigger purpose than simply decrease the dropouts of the students. And then since they realize that, they really focus to provide this service by allocating their resources on these purposes. And eventually this will help them also to reach the other objectives, which is output rather than realizing a specific value. So in this sense, complementing one type of evaluations, which is very quantitative, very instrumental, with the value-based approach, the organizations could see the full picture of their operation. And moreover, they could align their objectives, not their objectives, their purposes with the objectives of the funders, for example. Because I agree with the previous speakers that often these differences between objective and purpose actually can crowd out the core core purpose, core ideals of the cultural organizations. And this is what we call instrumentalization. So trying to avoid them to look beyond, only to meeting the objectives of the funding supporters actually can damage their work in a way that they can decrease efforts towards what they're really important for. What this could be important for the funders. This is, maybe it looks like a little bit complicated, but I was in a hurry to produce something. Just abstract yourself from the numbers. But this is different organizations. This is Oral History Group. They're all listed here. This is all the possible values we evaluate for them. And they're the most important values for each organization. It's in the different colors you see here. So the idea is that if you see all these clusters of purposes that one organizations like to achieve, and then when you multiply it by all the different organizations, you can actually see the different grouping of this organization in your portfolio like a funder, and you can be more aware of what they're really pursuing as a core of their operations and support this core instead of imposing, let's say, objectives which might be not very relevant for their own purpose, or be aware that, for example, for the consortium, which it's, let's say, contemporary artistic center, if they are focusing on this purpose, but they somehow searching or you expect from them to put effort on the societal relevance, they're doing this only because this is strong, that their knowledge, creativity, inventions, and independence, it's very strong value for them. And only because of that, they can contribute to the different societal purposes, like contributing to the communities, local communities, to re-engage with the art, to be more active in the arts, co-curation, and so forth. To conclude, I'd just like to say that through the lenses of the value-based approach, I also learn about this multiplicity of values, but also stakeholders or partnerships, which organizations are trying to achieve in their operations. And I think as a evaluator, I see my role here to support them, really understand better how this balance between social and cultural and societal work for them. And it's very different from in the different contexts. I agree also that situated practices are very important. We call it context. So each context of the organizations can be different, and they can, this is why we work a lot with the proxies, which reflect on these differences of the context. So thank you very much. And I hope to have possibilities in the rooms to explore further on your questions.
Thank you very much, Lucy. I hope we can now move to the breakout rooms. We are distributed randomly to the breakout rooms. No choice, unfortunately.
I think they're coming along, the breakouts, so just a few seconds. And yeah, the speakers are going to divide themselves, and everyone can choose which one to join. Yeah.
Thanks for the clarification.
And we're gonna have about, I think, 20 minutes because we are running a bit late. So yeah, we'll automatically close them around 4:20, 22 maybe.
Thank you.
Let me know if you see them.
Yeah, we see them.
Okay.
Sorry, are we automatically allocated, or I have to choose also?
Anybody can choose the room where to go.
I mean, you are in one room, and Laura and I are in the other room.
Okay, so
we can be both in the same.
No. Okay, I don't need to choose. You allocate me. This is my question.
I would invite you to go to room 1-2 if you want, because we have a great majority in room 2.
I think there are still 15 people who didn't join any breakout room, so we encourage you to join number 1 now, because everybody's joining number 2 for some reason. So yeah.
Okay, so I don't see where I can join the
Yeah, me
breakout
neither.
rooms.
I still can't see the breakout rooms anywhere. I was clicking around.
Okay, let's check why maybe. I see.
Yeah, that's why I thought it would be good to just split us.
Or we can also, yeah, assign you randomly, maybe Ludovic.
Yeah, just assign me to some group and
Okay.
yeah, because I can't see anywhere the breakout room option.
Okay, that's weird. Not sure why.
Well, now I have.
Okay, Ludovic, I will assign you. It's faster, maybe.
Okay, we should all be
Okay.
there.
Lui probabilmente non è lì, quindi vabbè. Se...
Sì, perché a me risulta assigned.
Ok, sì, no, vuol dire che lui non ha accettato. Ok, top. Direi ai tipo 17. Se puoi scrivere un messaggio tipo you have 5 minutes left e poi tipo ai 21 you have 1 minute left e poi ai tipo 22 riportiamo indietro. Ok? Io vado, dove vado? Nella 2, che ho mandato Lucia nella 1 e niente, se c'è qualcosa scrivimi su Teams. Ok? Grazie.
We are still expecting the group 1, right? I suppose their conversation is very interesting. 20. They don't want to leave the breakout room.
But
They're
I
back.
think in maximum 60 seconds they would close.
Yeah, they're back. I think we have already like 20 something. Yep. Okay, welcome back everybody to the big room in the Zoom this afternoon. There were two, I suppose, very interesting breakout room discussions going on in parallel. So I attended the group 1, right? Or group 2 with Ludmila. I don't remember the number. And yeah, group 2 was Ludmila, group 1 was with Laura, and I went. Let me see, is everybody here? Who from Philea was, I think, Lucia, who were you in that group? Who from you would like to say a few words in a couple of minutes about the conversation in group 1 with Laura and Iwan?
So I was in that room. I guess it's better if Laura or Iwan talk instead of me. But if you want, otherwise, I can just say that there were different perspectives, not only from the foundation sector, which not always happen in our meeting, which is something very positive, and lots of follow-up discussion. The last one was on AI, which I found extremely interesting because it's connected to several other conversations we're having. And so this idea of someone mentioned, not from this group, but heard that someone felt that maybe AI could bring something more neutral to the evaluation practice, which was absolutely not shared by the group for a number of reasons. But I think, yeah, Laura or Iwan, if you wanted to.
Yeah.
I think I'm not sure how I'd go about summarizing the conversation. I also didn't really get a chance to take notes. But I think this point about neutrality came up in the sense of also discussing whether the role of the evaluator is to be neutral or not, whether neutrality is something that is achievable or even something we should be aspiring to. We also talked quite extensively about the sense of shame that especially Ivan sort of perceives funders as often having about their role, and sort of discomfort with the power that they have, the power of decision making, and how certain kind of practices seem to be rooted in that shame. And we talked, I think Veronica spoke very beautifully also about the importance of making implicit things explicit, and transparency as a kind of antidote to that shame. And I'm sure I've missed some things out, so please somebody jump in with anything I forgot to say.
Afra asked about the peer-to-peer funding, and and then asked what's the difference sets apart from the traditional funding mechanism. And my answer is basically that there is assumption that like apart from the traditional funding, that's a peer-to-peer thing, but even within the peer-to-peer funding, there's a lot more work need to be done, especially to understand different kind of social proximities and how that translate into social dynamic. How do we understand that kind of social dynamic in the bigger purpose of the funding? Is that kind of work hasn't been done yet, and then I think we need more work around that. So I think that's more or less that.
Yep. Yeah. Well, thank you. I would like to then, from our group actually with Ludmila. Maybe Ludmila, you can say a few words from your perspective.
It was interesting to discuss about what value means in terms of the different processes and how this reflect the different context of the different organizations, which I found always important questions because these values changes with different contexts, we know, and it's important to acknowledge that. The other things was interesting to reflect the practitioners' perspectives of a need of tools which really reflect their own practices, the core of their practices, and not only the objectives of their supporters or the funders. What else? We also reflect on the practical issues, where to find these kind of tools. Yeah, I think this was more or less.
Yeah. And also from the funder's perspective, that I think it was interesting that You also asked how the funders evaluate. And there is a great variety. I think it's not only for this particular group, but in every foundation, in every funding organization, we all adapt our tools or choose the evaluation or the monitoring tools or those tools for extracting the value or our contribution or the contribution also of the arts and culture in different ways that are suited most to our purposes or that seem to us that suit us best. But there are many other tools out there and many other experiences that I think are worth to be explored by funders. I particularly found it very interesting when a few years ago I did it as Philea member a Tiepolo exchange through Philea, which was facilitated by Philea, by Lucia, to actually learn from other foundations in the network how they do their evaluations. And I learned enormously only with the 2 or 3 visits. That really, there is a lot out there that we could learn, of course, from different perspectives. I clearly believe that this conversation is not finishing here. And also, as speaking on behalf of the Catalyst Board of the Arts and Culture Funders Forum, I hope that we could continue or at least like take stock of this first conversation. It's not first, but it's actually something that we can document and we can actually transfer further and think as funders in arts and culture, what can we do next? How can we value our own experiences, knowledge, and the knowledge that is brought to us by experts like Laura and Iwan and Ludmila. So I think it's not one webinar. I don't want to finish this with one webinar because the topic is extremely valuable for all of us. I want to thank everybody, to thank Ludmila, Iwan, Laura, our speakers, as well as all of you. And of course, we would value very much any recommendations or ideas that you might have after this conversation, any suggestions, how can we actually do this better, or what else would you like to learn from the Arts and Culture Funders Forum webinars? So I hope this is not the last topic that we discuss about evaluation, and I hope that we could continue this conversation in a different modes. Thank you very much once again, also to the organizers from Philea,